Hey everyone, welcome to Bombin with Scoops and the Wolf. As the case is on most Mondays in the last couple of months, this time on Monday we are joined by a guest, and this week we have plucked another one from across the seas, Mike Bithell, the creator of Thomas Was Alone and the upcoming volume. So thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thank you for having me. That's a lovely intro. Thank you.
I try
We're
to
real
make
professional
them, I
around
try to
here.
make them lovely, you know.
It's good. I mean, the standard, the bar. I mean, I've been informed, obviously, by everyone else in the Indie Illuminati about, the kind of ship you guys run.
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah,
This is how we roll around here.
Yeah.
We only clean it up on Mondays. Just don't watch the Friday show, and you'll have this pristine understanding of how we treat our guests and just how we conduct our lives in general.
It kind of slides off as this week goes on, does it? Kind of inevitably.
Yeah, I think that's called like a slow descent into alcoholism, getting towards the weekend. I think that's how I like to describe Giant Bomb in a nutshell when we pitch it to investors. Please invest in this site full of sad people that are just trying to barely get it to the weekend.
And that's why we're back at CPS.
Yeah, that's why someone bought our company. Gonna get these people off the streets.
Ugh.
Alex, how was your weekend?
It was just fine. Obviously, I sat around and watched the Super Bowl, as many people did last night, and that was kind of a train wreck. I had pretty much checked out of that game entirely by around the third quarter.
And my guess is Seahawks fans were blacked out by the third quarter and don't remember the rest anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it last night. Most of the Seahawks fans I've known over the years are some of the most beleaguered, downtrodden people in all of football. Just knowing that they could get so close to success over and over again, and then constantly find ways to fuck it up over the years. Nobody ever believed that the Seahawks would finally take it, but I think this year was their year, and it was fun to watch them kind of beat the shit out of Peyton Manning, because, I don't know, I always get a little bit of a morbid thrill out of that whenever that happens.
Hey, I don't forget, he beat my Chicago Bears in 2006 as part of the Indianapolis Colts, and sure, he may have beaten Rex Grossman, which I don't think is much of a feat, and I think may say more about Peyton Manning's enduring Super Bowl legacy than anything else. But I was rooting for that man to fall, and I unfortunately got way more than I bargained for, because then I started to feel really bad about it about halfway through the game.
Yeah, see, I never quite hit that moment of empathy. I don't know. I think I got so many years of watching him battle the Patriots has just hardened me against any of his hardships. Like, I kind of enjoy his misery on some terrible level, but yeah, I mean, other than that, like, it was a pretty low-key weekend. Went over to a friend's house, watched a bunch of Luther, because I'd never watched that show before.
I heard that's pretty good.
It is. It's a good good cop show if you're into that kind of thing. I have a hard time believing a sort of misbegotten, non-charming Idris Elba. Like, I think that's a bit of a stretch for my imagination. But he makes it work, and I'll give him that. He's a fine actor, and he makes that work. But I didn't end up playing a whole lot of games. I picked up Dead Rising 3 again, tried to amble my way through a little bit more of that. Finally did finish Broken Age, which, yeah, okay, you were right about that ending.
Yes, that was a great ending. A great, as far as cliffhangers go, that's about. It feels like it was planned that way all along.
Yeah, that is an example of a cliffhanger done extraordinarily well, and that does not happen very often, so kudos to Double Fine for pulling that one off. I am now actually legitimately pretty excited about the second half of that game, whereas before I was like, this is cool, I'll probably play the second half. Now I'm like, now I will definitely play the second half. You have got me interested.
Mike, is the Super Bowl a thing in the UK at all? Like, I don't. Do you have friends that throw Super Bowl parties? Like, is there any bit of that outside of the US, or is that a very American-centric thing?
Well, it's the World. Is it the World Series? No, that's baseball, isn't it?
That's baseball.
That's baseball. You're close.
No, it's our TV over here is really trying at the moment, because I think one of the big channels got the rights to it, so they've been trying to convince us that it's not just rugby with excessive padding. But yeah, no, not really. To be honest, most of my knowledge of Super Bowl is Twitter becomes unusable for a couple of hours. That's the full extent of my awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a big sports guy anyway, but no, I don't know that at all.
Yeah, it was really weird. A friend of mine who, let's say, did not get their football watching in the most legal of senses, The way they would watch it was through some streaming service on the internet, and the one they watched that had the highest quality was like a UK broadcast, and just they would have two UK anchors that actually knew what they were talking about, and then like the most like eighth string like football player like from some team that you would never heard of. You'd never heard of the player, but they could say, "We have an NFL player. We have locked one up."
Yeah.
And here to explain it to the UK.
It's very alien to us. Like we know like Super Bowl, I guess from the UK perspective, especially as a UK nerd, it's that thing that there was an episode of Friends about, and it's when trailers come out. Like that's basically all we know it for over here. But it's okay, and there were some good trailers. So, and that weird Morpheus advert, which was strange.
That's true. I guess for the worldwide audience, it's just more about the ridiculous amount of money they get spent trying to push car commercials for a couple hour span. I managed to Alex get through. I'm at the very end of Banner Saga.
Okay.
I've made it to the final battle. I was bashing my head against the boss like 5 or 6 times last night before I just decided to say, F it, I'm going to give this another go.
Did you figure out the strategy yet?
I think so. I don't want to say it out loud. I'll run it by you after the show. But essentially, the Banner Saga has, for the vast majority of its time, like you can kind of just keep employing the same strategies over and over again. And then at the last second, they introduce a boss character, and it's the only kind of boss that you face in the game, really, that completely changes how you're supposed to approach the battle, I would say almost entirely.
Yep.
So it makes a lot of your strategies counterintuitive. I appreciate that the game is forcing me to rethink my strategy, but I think it is poor design to have that just appear out of nowhere at the end when you sort of have completely hardened how you would approach a battle, and then the game's like, none of that stuff works. So, everything from the way you have invested points into your guys, to the way which characters you're picking, to the items you have purchased. I'm sure it's all very doable, and I think I have a strategy that will work regardless of what I have used up to this point, but it's a little frustrating that the game keeps you pretty constrained in terms of how you can customize your stuff because you're so resource constrained throughout the entirety of the game, and then suddenly it's like, hey, maybe do this thing. Or try this thing. It's like, oh, well, that's not that great.
Yeah, I mean, it's emblematic of the problem I had, the one major problem I had with that game, which is that it felt like a really good opening third of one long game, as opposed to an entire game in its own little self. That ending is a ridiculous cliffhanger, which I've mentioned multiple times, and the fact that there is only one boss fight in the game, with no real build-up to how the battle strategies change up to that point, is a real bummer, because like all of a sudden it's like, oh hey, the difficulty just jumped off a cliff all of a sudden, and you're like, but all this time I've just been beating stupid little rock demons and like bandits who I can kill in like 5 minutes. This makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, like I have my general strategy has been to I got tanks in front, arrows in the back, and then I got a magic guy that does some real crazy damage.
He does some helpful stuff.
Well, if you can get a cluster of them, and they're in a diagonal pattern, like you can get like 5 health off of 4 or 5 guys if you set it up correctly.
That shield recharge of his is pretty handy too.
That's really handy. But what's not handy is when the boss can do 15 health swings. When that is, I think for most characters, the most amount of health they can have. So your tanks aren't really doing much tanking when they can only take off 2 shield points and then get hit for 15 health. So I think I have a strategy that I'll have to employ. But the one thing I will say about that game is that the world building it does is truly incredible. Like it really does feel like you inhabit a place, and when big moments do happen, you feel as awe-inspired as the characters do. For a place that is full of gods and giants and magic and things of that nature, it really does feel like a tangible place in a way that most games feel like I just inhabit a world that just happen to be created. Like, here's this fantasy world. They just feel like sort of environmental dressing for a bunch of game mechanics. whereas the Banner Saga feels very much like the world came first, and that the mechanics, the game you're playing, just happens to take place in this world, as opposed to the other way around. And like it makes me want to just sit and spend another hour in the map and click on every little section to read just a little bit more about the lore, because I actually do find the world to be particularly fascinating.
Yeah, I've complained in the past that sometimes games get a little too willing, I think, to throw a ton of their backstory into discoverables, like weird background things in the pause menu. Just like here are all these little documents you have to sit and read in the middle of this game that you're kind of trying to feverishly pace your way through. But that game does a really good job of kind of embedding that stuff into the the conversations you have with people, if the narration and the spots where those pop up, and then obviously when you're just kind of clicking around that world map, like there's a lot of really good detail put into that stuff. That so much so that I actually kind of wanted to use the map and actually read through that stuff, as opposed to most games where I'm kind of like, yeah, but I could just go kill some guys instead of just sitting here reading things. So I don't know.
Yeah.
So that is definitely one of the things that game does the best, I think, of all the various things it tries to do.
Mike, are you playing anything right now, or are you just completely like every time you're working on a game, it's to the detriment of knowing what else is out there for 2 to 3 years?
It's basically the latter. No,
Okay.
I'm playing a bit. I've still got to play Broken Age. I got that because I'm a backer, so I got that. I've got Banner Saga to play. I've got a bunch of stuff. I'm trying to think what the last thing I played was. It might well have been Assassin's Creed 4, which is really sad and old. Oh no, I played the new Batman the other day. It's the first Batman game I've enjoyed in a while because I've not been a big fan. I really didn't like Arkham City, so I like that. That was good.
Really? That is a contrarian position. Do you care to elaborate on why Arkham City didn't really resonate?
For me, it was too big, and it felt like I loved Arkham Asylum was fantastic. And I'm not sure. I look back now at Arkham Asylum, and I'm wondering how much of my enjoyment of it was just surprise, like just oh my god, a good Batman game, because I love the comics, and I think I was hungry for a good Batman game. But the Metroid model kind of seemed to work really well, and it was a really nice way of dealing with Batman as a kind of a gadget user, because that's obviously where all of his abilities are, to kind of balance that out through a kind of a Metroidvania kind of setup. But then, yeah, the open world, it just felt it felt like it didn't really change much from that. They just spread out the gameplay. I spent way too much time just flying, and I didn't enjoy playing as Batman flying through the air enough to enjoy those joining up bits. The traveling around in open worlds is so crucial to my enjoyment of them. Like GTA, it's fun because you drive around, and if you're like me, you keep forgetting to drive on the right-hand side and crash into everything, and it's kind of a good ongoing thing. And then, like the Assassin's Creed games, I just love the parkour system. Like when it works, the flow and the feeling and movement, it's just fun to travel from A to B. And yeah, Arkham City never really worked for me on that. And I didn't like some of the way some of the enemies were kind of written, and they didn't feel right to me. But I think that's more because I'm more into the kind of the comic stuff than the animated show, which I got the impression it kind of took a lot of tonal stuff from that. But then Origins I really liked, because I think it felt simplified, it felt pulled back to the kind of the stuff I enjoyed, much tighter environments and stuff, which can kind of, I don't know, worked for me.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I don't think it's necessarily the case that sort of the general formula that Rocksteady has come up with couldn't work in an open world, but that City's open world, one, I had a problem with it because it felt just so incredibly contrived. Like they weren't willing to commit to a true open world, which I understand. The resources to build something like that to make it feel livable. There's a reason why there are only a couple of developers in the world capable of doing that, and they spend 5+ years with each of those games to make sure they pull it off, and they have decades that they're building upon to make it work. And so in City, it felt like they tried to sort of, have the best of both worlds. Hey, we're going to have an open world, but we're going to contrive it in a way that it really doesn't feel as open as you would want when you know that Gotham City is just beyond the wall. Like
it wasn't the main event. It's like if I'm buying a Batman game, I want Gotham City, and I want to. It goes back to what you were saying about Banner Saga. It's that kind of world building stuff. I just didn't believe Arkham City. It didn't feel like GTA. People go on about GTA being an amazing simulation of a city. It's not. It's absolute rubbish. It's faking everything. But it's faking it so well that you feel that it's much cleverer as a simulation than it is, and you believe it, and you start to know landmarks. And I can drive around GTA 4 and find my bearings as I would in a real city. That's incredible, and we underestimate the skill that goes into producing that kind of rich world. Whereas, Arkham City, just for me, it felt like they had a load of really cool locations that they wanted to do, and then they kind of stitched them together in kind of the Mario World level map, basically, and just had me flying around that level map, and it didn't feel real to me. It didn't feel cohesive. Similar problem to which one was it? Mafia? Which was the most recent Mafia one? Where it was where it felt like where it was beautiful, but it didn't feel like a real place I was in. It felt like it just didn't have that cohesive feeling that you get in really great open world games. And weirdly, Arkham Origins for me did do that, and I need to go back and work out why. I think it was the Gotham thing. I think it felt more cohesive. The Christmas thing, even though it's a really gimmicky way of explaining why no one's on the streets, it tied everything together and gave it this kind of classic, tied it all together really nicely, I thought.
As a man who grew up on Shane Black films, I am very much okay with the idea of Christmas as a place of violence and a time of violence. So, I think that's fine. I think I agree with you on the city bit, just because I thought Asylum worked so well because of the sense of claustrophobia that environment and that world kind of built around Batman. I like City a lot, but I agree that the open world thing was definitely not what I wanted necessarily from a next Batman game. It's like, a fleshing out of the world a little bit is fine, but like just being able to kind of run around and do anything wasn't necessarily what I was asking for from Batman.
I still maintain the game, and it's on one of the games I'd love to make at some point if I ever have the resources to do it, is a really, like an open world building. It's something like you never see them really kind of put that depth into a contained space. And actually just going, well, I'm going to make it like Die Hard, basically. I'm going to make Nakatomi Plaza. I'm going to put some bad guys in it, and I'm going to let the player work out what happens next. That really appeals to me as something to do at some point. But
I want to play a Mike Bithell Die Hard game. I'm just saying it right now. I play it.
I want to make it. I might do a Kickstarter one day.
Okay.
Mike Bithell presents Die Hard in quotes because I don't have the rights.
It's all going to be cubes running around.
There you go. Yeah, that seems to be kind of
in a bloody tank top.
This is it, yeah. Oh, it designed itself, man. Can you imagine
the gritty reboot of Thomas Was Alone? Thomas is no longer alone. He's got these guns.
Thomas, ho, 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 yeah.
Get Reginald Vell Johnson to narrate. Oh, that'll be great.
It's dumb.
So for folks who aren't aware, I think most people what Thomas Was Alone is. It's been on pretty much every platform under the sun at this point. But you're knee deep into Volume. So can you kind of give sort of the elevator pitch on what Volume is for folks who maybe haven't heard too much about it?
So Volume it's a stealth game, but it's kind of a backward step. It's the kind of stealth game I love, which is very arcadey, puzzly, predictable, but in terms of what the AIs are doing and in terms of how the world works. Stealth game. I think there's a lot of awesome stealth games, but most of them, the fashion has been to move away from kind of predictability and understanding of the environment into more of a kind of either a horror context or just a lack of awareness context where you don't really know what's going on or where people are or what the scenario is. It feels it's being played for its lack of power, and I wanted to make kind of where the old stealth games, kind of things like Thief and Metal Gear Solid, where it was a power fantasy. It just so happened that your power was being really clever rather than being very strong, which doesn't feel like something that many stealth games do anymore. So I kind of wanted to go back and do the kind of stealth game I know I would have loved as like a 14, 15-year-old, and then to on top of that do some new story stuff, which is a bit of a jump up from Thomas Was Alone.
It seems like a lot of modern stealth games are stacking systems on top of systems on top of systems on top of systems, whether it's sort of systems that the player is interacting or driving, or AI systems that are colliding, so that you're unable to. It's constantly testing the player to react to the unpredictability and maintain their stealth or maintain their mission objective, as opposed to, you know, previous stealth games, due to largely technological restraints, had very limited AI and unpredictability, and so it really was more of a puzzle game than sort of an action game in which you are trying to be stealthy, because that's all they could kind of pull off at the time. Whereas what you're doing now is, you know, obviously, you know, it's you making the game, so you're limited by resources, but you're also making a design choice to have predictability be a part of the game.
Yeah, and I mean, it's been painted. I've seen some articles about it where it's been painted as this massive critique of modern stealth games. I love stealth games. I mean, Hitman Blood Money is the greatest video game ever made. Done.
It's a terrific game.
Full stop. That's the end of the conversation. Like, I love stealth games as they are, but it's just the genre went in a direction that was different. I think it does go back actually to Thief and Metal Gear Solid. I think I'm right in saying they came out in the same year, and it feels like Metal Gear are around the same time. I think like
same era certainly.
Yeah. And I think it was like Metal Gear Solid was one path, which was the kind of they're very arcadey, very much the massive pulled out camera view, the kind of the awareness, almost like a strategy puzzle game rather than an action game. And then Thief was the opposite side, which was hiding in the shadows, very constrained view, all of this kind of stuff. And it just feels like, thanks to, I guess, Splinter Cell and Hitman, we went down the Thief road and we didn't go down the Metal Gear road. So this is almost the what if we'd gone the other way. So it's hopefully it stands out a little bit. Unfortunately for me, a lot of indies seem to have the same kind of love of this genre, so there's obviously quite a few other stealth games with the vision cone kind of stuff going on.
Yeah, I mean, Mark of the Ninja was one of my favorite games from that year. It really kind of crystallized. I think I have said probably far too generally in the past that I disliked stealth games, and a lot of where that feeling came from was not having enough information as the player in a 3D space as more stealth games were going 3D, where I just felt like often I just didn't have enough information to actually enact anything that I wanted to do. And, what Mark the Ninja did was put into stark contrast, just how difficult that is to pull off in 3D, and now Mark the Ninja does it very, very well. It's not to say it's easy to do in 2D, but that when you do flatten the plane and the player is only going left to right, you're able to communicate visually what the enemies know, what the player is capable of doing, in a way that just becomes infinitely more complicated when you're talking about a 3D space.
It's really telling when you look at like stealth. One of the big mechanics that you've seen introduced to stealth games in the last couple of years are specifically things to improve your sense of spatial awareness. So things like, usually seeing through walls. So Last of Us, I guess, had the most recent one where you can kind of do a slight crouch and suddenly you can see sound and stuff. It seems that as the camera is pulled in and in and in on the high definition character designs, as it has in all genres over the last few years, suddenly we've realized, this has got too close, and people started adding back in that spatial awareness. But volume, because the camera is so high and above the action, it means I've got the luxury of being able to show everything. Basically, the objective here is to have zero ambiguity, and see how that goes. There are certain things I don't telegraph, so you don't see where an enemy's going. It's not like a Hitman, the most recent one style kind of line showing you where they're going to go.
Right.
But they repeat their paths in that kind of classic way, so you can work it out. But the idea is, because stealth is one of the few genres where we actually celebrate games that obfuscate understanding. If you look at most games, good design generally is about knowing where things are and what's going to happen. If I do this, what will happen in the world? That's easy to do when you're making a game about guns, because it's other things dead. But with stealth, it feels like we stepped away from that kind of classic design sensibility of I want someone to load up a level in volume, see the world, see what the enemies are doing, come up with an idea, and then do that. And if they mess that up, I want it to be entirely the player's fault and not the game for misleading them or confusing them. That's the objective. We'll see how successful I am at
it. In the case of this one, there's no, you don't actually, the main character doesn't really engage in combat at all, right?
No, you can't. You can't kill in the game. You can't even do stealth kills, because that was another problem I have. Another problem I have with stealth. Another thing that I think, at least when I play stealth games, so when I sat down to do this, the thing I realized about how I play stealth games, I got a stack of every stealth game I owned, and just played them for a couple of days. And the problem I realized was the way I play them is I room clear. I walk into a room, I work out how to take out those 5 guys as efficiently as possible. And that's okay, but it means that I play the levels the same way every time because I've found the winning strategy. There is no point in a stealth game sneaking past a guard, because inevitably the designer has set up a scenario where you can get behind them and do a stealth kill on them if you just get to the right point. And players do that, even if they're not aware of it, they find the optimal path through a level. So by removing that, by making it that when you finish a level in the game, there will be the same number of enemies as there were when you started, the hope is, again, we'll see, this is all hyperbole until it happens, the hope is that that means you don't worry about it. You don't work out the way to kill people. You engage with more of the stealth mechanics in the game, and you use more of the interesting stuff. And there's other things we do, so you don't have an inventory between levels. You know, every object you pick up in the game is specific to the map you're on. So there's none of this kind of hoarding of grenades that you get in games where you kind of go, oh, I'll save that awesome thing for the moment I need it.
Well, so I do that in every single game and then never use any of that stuff.
Exactly, right? And it's something that I hate. And again, with stealth, because, you know, especially with volume, because it's a lot of gadgets and a lot of weird gizmos you use to fiddle around with the environment, I didn't want the player to be limited. I didn't want the player to be limited by their own desire to save things. So yeah, you don't get to carry stuff between missions. If you have something in that level, that's for that level, use it. And also nothing has a finite ammo. So you can keep reusing the awesome thing within that world. But obviously they have recharge time, so there's a pacing thing to that. Again, it's hopefully the objective was to take what I loved and then try and work out how to make it more varied. But again, I always feel really weird having these kind of conversations because this game could be shit. Like,
hey, at least you're honest.
There's every possibility that this game will be absolute rubbish, but I hope it won't be.
You got to work on your salesmanship. I'm throwing that out there. You got to nail this down. You got to let everyone know this is going to be the best damn stealth game that's ever been, because, you know, I think the humility is rad. You got to get that sell face on.
It's the Englishness, I think. It's always holding me back.
So how much this game's a huge departure, at least, you know, sort of mechanically speaking, from Thomas Was Alone, and I know that you're developing a narrative for Volume, but this one seems much more mechanics based, like a lot of core stuff like that than Thomas Was Alone. So how much of this design was informed by a desire to do something kind of completely different, you know, to get out of your comfort zone, make something, you know, altogether different than Thomas Was Alone, or was, you know, or are these two games linked a little more closely than seems on the surface?
So there's a few answers to that. Definitely when Thomas did well, everyone told me I had to make a sequel. And there's a little bit of petulance involved in going, you know what, like that would be easy money, but screw it. Like, I finally, for the first time, I worked in traditional dev for like 6 years before Thomas. And there's definitely something of, oh my god, I can make whatever I want. I'm not going to make a franchise sequel. Finally, I don't have to do that, you know. So
but then you look at that pile of money and you go, oh, I see how people.
It's tempting. The pile of money is tempting. But sometimes, yeah, sometimes things matter more than that, I guess. I just kind of, I was like, no, I want to do something else. And this was a game that, you know, I've been designing in my head since I, you know, first was handed a copy of Metal Gear Solid and told to climb up and down the ladder 3 times so you could see Meryl in her underwear. Like, that was like like that. This is a game I've been wanting to do for years. In terms of like the story mechanic thing, what's really interesting there, and this is again maybe slightly too self-effacing, but Thomas Was Alone was meant to be a really good mechanic-led game. The way I saw it when I was making it was I thought I was making a really good mechanics platformer with a kind of serviceable story, and it turned out I was doing the absolute opposite. According to like reviews and stuff, I don't know. It was never the intention. That game, I think I get away with murder with Thomas Was Alone because I think people assume I was trying to make a kind of a a non-game experience, one of these kind of, is it a game, isn't it a game? No, I was really trying to make Mario, but like unsuccessfly. Fortunately, like in my opinion, kind of subpar soap opera script was considered good, so it kind of did all right. So to be honest, this is a similar thing. This is again me trying to make a mechanically interesting game, and then also trying to tell a story that I hope is competent and good alongside that and in it. And honestly, like I feel like critics will decide which of them I was going for in the fullness of time, because it happened with Thomas. Like maybe this is the mechanical one. I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, both of them, that I consider both those things equal. I think Thomas Was Alone was less successful mechanically than it was story-wise. Who knows with this one? As long as one of them's half decent, I'll be okay, I think.
Yeah, I guess whichever way it works out. Yeah, it'll still be celebrated one way or the other.
Like I get the impression, with kind of what things are known for, especially in indie games. Like people get pigeonholed and they get like, this is the thing that people liked about the game, so therefore that's the thing that indie game developer cares about. And often you meet these people and you realize, oh no, they were totally trying to do something completely different, and I find that interesting.
So
Definitely.
Did you have any temptation then to sort of lean into what people responded to? Because it sounds like instead of necessarily doing that, you're just going to keep doing what was successful before, regardless of how people sort of received it in a different way. But I think it might, I could see how it might be tempting to say, well, people seem to really like the story, I'm going to lean really heavy into that.
Well, I think there's pig-headedness, like in the kind of the textbook indie thing of I'm really lucky that Thomas did as well as it did, that I can kind of do what I want. So there's that, so I can just do the things that interest me. But definitely the fact that people like the story of Thomas definitely affected the way Volume's been written, in that I actually kind of sat down and there's expectation now, cross out the damsel in distress opening and just kind of try and come up with something good. There's definitely a sense that people expect it to be a good story, and that means that I've had to work harder at it. So I hope it's good. Either that, or it's going to be just way too self-aware. Again, we'll see. But I think it's good. I think it's good.
I'm sure your collaborators will be glad to hear you say that. Who are you working with on this game? I saw like a half dozen different names on the website. So you're still obviously got a pretty small crew. Who do you have working on this with you?
So I'm the only full-time person. So I'm doing the code and the design and the writing. And then I've got David Housden, who's the composer from Thomas, who's coming back to do the music for this. I've got Chris Randall, who's a sound engineer, who's doing all the sound work and stuff, and it's awesome. Who else is working on it? I've got an art team, so I've got Daz Watford, who's an old friend from back when I was working in industry. He quit his day job and came and worked on Volume, which is awesome. So he's doing like the look of the thing and the design of all the art. Bunch of 3D modelers, Wayne, Chris, Nick, a bunch of different people. And then a voice cast. So I've announced there's kind of 3 main actors in it, and the ones I've announced are Danny Wallace, who's the guy who did Thomas Was Alone's voiceover, who's the kind of the Mr. Paperclip of military hardware, is the kind of thing. And then Charlie McDonnell, who's the star, who's kind of the Robert Loxley character. And then there's a villain who I've not yet talked about who that is, but that's going to be cool too. So there's lots of people. It's scary when I say it like that.
When you actually have to start actually listing out all the people involved that aren't you, that you're responsible for, and you have to pay and make sure it's worth their time.
I know I've missed people. I missed out Aaron, the animator. I missed out loads of people when I said that. It's terrifying. But it's good. It's coming together, and everyone's just doing amazing work. I think with Thomas, we didn't know what we were making. Me and David, the composer, just kind of found each other through a mutual friend because we were both making stuff, and he did amazing work, and we kind of we collaborated, but we just assumed it was going to be a small little game that like 20 people would play. And Danny kind of did the voiceover on a whim because I emailed him, and he used to be a game critic, so he was like, "Oh, I'll be in a game, yeah, why not?" and it's kind of, then it blew up. So there's now a lot of expectation and awareness that we all know, like, even if this is bad, people are probably going to play it, and if it's really bad, then people will hate us. That's cool.
So you're trying not to make that happen.
Exactly, yeah. I'm realizing through the course of this conversation that I'm not presenting myself in the most positive light. But yeah, no, hopefully. I think it's good.
Well, when did you realize, or when did it become clear that, you mentioned that the success of Thomas Was Alone allows you to kind of take your time, make the game you want to make. Obviously you can't take forever, but at least you can kind of breathe easy and not feel like you got to ship. How quickly did that happen with Thomas Was Alone? Was that something out of the gate? Was that something that you built towards using sales and other tactics? And then obviously the game was ported to a lot of places. So at what point did you sort of cross that threshold and realize, like, I'm going to do okay, I can take my time and make the game I want to make for the next one?
It was a weird one with Thomas because there was no plan. Basically, like, the plan was finish the game. I think lots of indies do this. I kind of was like, I need to get this game finished, and then maybe it'll get a review on a big website, and then I'll be Notch. Like, that was the entire thought process. I did a few things. I talked at events and conferences and took the game to stuff. But mainly, to be fair, I was taking the game to events just to watch people play and kind of do play testing. Essentially, it was nothing to do with promotion. It was just seeing if the jump felt good. But then it came out in July of 2012, and I think I made about $500. So I bought an iPad.
As one does.
Just use up all the money. Look, if this is all I'm going to get, I might as well get an iPad.
This is this was the fight. But what was kind of brilliant in retrospect, but horrible at the time, was it made $500 and then stopped. And I was like, and I had, I worked, I was at this point I was a design lead at a company in London, so I had a job, I was comfortable. The hobby game, I wasn't Notch, but it was okay. Like, I went back to my day job and carried on, and then it was a really slow burn. Just a couple of websites started reviewing it. It didn't get the best reviews. It wasn't a 10 out of 10 game. It was, I think, the Metacritic's like 78 or something. It didn't set the world on fire, but it slowly, people started talking about it. It started coming up in lists and things, and it just kind of carried on. Then it got on Steam, which was the big one. That was November, and at that point it was like, okay, maybe I'm going to be able to buy another iPad, and the kind of, that was the thought process. And then it started making.
Is that how you measure your success? Just like an Excel spreadsheet with iPad purchases?
Yeah, no, basically, yeah, that's my entire measure. But it wasn't great. It wasn't great. But it was selling, and it did okay. But it was still like, I'd made, I think by the end of November, I'd made like 2 or 3 months' salary, which wasn't enough to ever consider that being a new job. And then the Christmas sale hit, and everyone knows how well the Christmas sales go on Steam. And I remember, and it's really sad, I stayed home on New Year's Eve that year because it was about to hit a year's salary on New Year's Eve, sorry. And no one ever believes me, but it is absolutely true. At midnight, it ticked over on the stats page behind the scenes, and I had a year's salary in the bank. And that was the point where it's like, okay, I'm going to actually quit my day job. Had a fun, day, New Year's Day, just going, oh my God, this is going to happen. Then Total Biscuit did a video, and then by the end of that week, I had 3 years salary in the bank.
Wow.
And that was the point where it just all went crazy. Yeah, and we'd been kind of quietly getting on with a PlayStation port, and that came out and did crazy well, and yeah, it just kind of kept going and going and going. And now I have to read people telling me I was, an overnight success, and I'm remembering back to that iPad.
Well, yeah, I remember when we did a quick look of it. I really enjoyed the game. And then we did a video of it, but that was just kind of it. And then I remember kind of looking at the game 6 months later and realizing like it had really taken off in a way that it just it didn't. And I think it's easy to look back a year and a half in retrospect and be like, oh yeah, big success. Like, right out of the gate. You know, it was a
and
super
people
meat
only
boy
ever
of its
see it in
time.
retrospect. And that's the thing. I say this to a lot of indies when you meet people at events and they, you know, they have a cool game. And they say, yeah, I brought it out and I've been selling it direct and I've, you know, not sold many copies and I'm going to have to start the next one and blah. And you kind of think that I think this mythology of overnight success has kind of, I think it's a cool story to tell people like the story I just told. The good bit of that story from like a storytelling point of view was New Year's Eve.
Right.
That's the bit of the story that people care about. But then the 6 months preceding that, that's a less interesting story, and therefore that story gets told less and less. And it means that a lot of indies, I think, have this assumption that, you know, if you make a good game, you're just going to hit overnight. And it does happen, but you have to make better games than Thomas Was Alone.
Well, and on top of that, it also sort of discounts, I imagine, the 6 months of, you know, horrible anxiety and tension you went through, like trying to figure out, is this actually going to be the direction my life is taking or not?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and that's, you know, that's a stressful process. But then, obviously, if it goes well, and I was lucky and it did, you forget. There's that thing, isn't there, that you forget childbirth. Apparently, there's something in the human mind that the pain of childbirth is forgotten because of the love of the baby. And I think that's
just long enough to forget why you did it in the first place, and then
exactly,
hey, let's have another kid.
It's apparently it's a trick that biology plays on women to kind of trick them into having more children. And far be it from me to compare releasing an indie game. I'm realizing headlong down it. But basically, I think there is an element of you forget the bad time because the good time was so good.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a weird one. It's a weird one, and it's a weird realization now that because people give a crap, I'm never going to have to go through that process again. Like, the chances are, you know, Volume will be reviewed on all the big game websites the day it comes out. Just kind of by default, that's almost going to happen. If it's rubbish, the third game might not get quite good coverage. But it's a weird realization that you fight that fight and you learn how to be really good at getting, you know, anyone to talk about your stuff at the exact moment where it stops being a challenge, where it stops being this massive uphill struggle, and that's a weird feeling. So that's why I think a lot of indies then go on and go, right, well, how can we help other indies? You know, how can we boost the visibility of other people? And I think it becomes that cycle of success followed by feeling really bad about that success and then going and trying to help other people achieve the same thing.
I have to ask, I wonder if you saw the big discussion / argument from Jason Rohr, where he sort of made his big pitch about the long tail of game sales and the idea that sort of the sales culture largely created by Steam and the expectation that players don't need to buy a game when it's full price because they can just wait, you know, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and there will be a huge sale as a result, actually really hurts the long tail sales of a game because it creates a culture in which people decide to wait as opposed to paying for games at the prices that developers think they're worth. I'm curious, given that, you know, you had a sort of long tail before you know the tail of the game even began, how you feel about that argument and what he was talking about.
Oh, I think it's a really hard one to generalize. Like, it's an almost impossible theory to ever test. I think there's, I don't know, I can only speak for me, but I think for me, when I see a game, I immediately think of the price I want to pay for that game. Mm-hmm. And that's the price I'm going to pay for that game. And there are games I have to buy the day they come out, and I'll rush the shop or jump on Steam and grab it, and I have to play those, and I'll pay whatever. And then there are games that it's like, yeah, for £2 I'll pick that up later and maybe not even bother playing it, but it'll be in my library. And I think that what the sales do is it makes it easier to get your game into the hands of people at the price they want to pay. I don't think there are many people who would see a game that they would normally pay for normal price, but because they're aware that of sales, that they would then wait. I think there's probably, like, I imagine probably the giant bomb audience, probably the kind of super aware video game fans probably play the system a bit and go, no, I'm going to hold off because, you know, the Steam sale's coming up and they'll probably be doing a discount or whatever. But the average player, I think, just gets it at the point where it suits them. I don't see it, and I think it does much more good than it does harm. Because if you look back at like really early indie stuff, you see that before all of this sales culture existed, there were no long tails, you know, and you can see this with box games, AAA games. The importance that's placed on the first week in terms of how much those games make, because they don't have a structure to sell you Call of Duty for 20 quid in 6 months' time, is ridiculous. There is no long tail. I mean, Call of Duty is a bad example because there's absolutely a long tail, but most AAA games don't have that kind of shelf life. They're there for that week, and then no one cares.
Yeah, maybe a month if you're lucky.
Exactly, right?
And you could probably make the argument that you know, used games wouldn't have become such a problem for the industry if the business model had, you know, had a long tail incorporated in it from the beginning. You know, the used games essentially becomes the long tail for video games because they become more affordable over time to a larger audience. It's just that, you know, the game publishers didn't bake that into how they sell the games, and someone else came up with it for them.
I think we also have the luxury as indies, and this is something I've talked to quite a bit with people who've been really successful with indie games. There's no cap. There's no point where everyone in the world who could buy Thomas Was Alone will have bought Thomas Was Alone. There's the kind of numbers that I'm dealing with. I mean, Thomas, I think it's getting a boxed release now, and that's probably going to push it to 1 million sales, which is nice.
Crazy! Congratulations.
Thank you. It's not there yet. We'll see how that does.
Yeah.
But that's tiny. That's an utterly tiny number in terms of how many people play video games and might play a platformer with rectangles. Like that's I've not peaked. There's no point where that happens. You only have to look at Minecraft. You know, it's still selling ridiculous numbers every day. I think
14 million. I think.
Yeah, it's not like you run out of players. It's not, you know, if everyone who plays indie games, this is why Humble Bundle works. If everyone who played indie games wanted to give me 20p for Thomas Was Alone, that would be much, much better than selling, you know, a lot of copies in the first month. Because there's never gonna be a point where there's no one who wants Thomas Was Alone anymore. What is the case is I suspect everyone who wants to spend $10 on Thomas Was Alone probably already owns Thomas Was Alone, and that's where the sales come in. Is that allows it? This is, you know, we're talking now, and I guess people are watching, and there'll probably be someone in your audience who watches this and goes, "This English guy seems okay," and I like rectangles, and they're not going to rush. They're not going to rush onto Steam right now and spend $10. But if they see my game in a Steam sale for $2, they might pick it up, you know. I don't think we ever run out of players, and therefore, why not give the game to the person at the price they want to pay?
I wonder how much you can publicly even say about this, but one of the questions that I think a lot of players have is they look at, they're very excited about sort of PlayStation Plus and the instant game collection that you know Sony offers on a monthly basis, and at one point Thomas Was Alone was part of that, and I wonder if you can, or how much you could say about, you know, how developer friendly that is. Like, was that something you were, you know, I know that it was very popular on there. I know a lot of people that I know, they played for the first time as a part of that service. But in terms of sort of, you know, monetarily, how that ends up working out for a developer like yourself.
Okay. So yeah, I do have to be careful because there are contract things and barriers. First of all, it did really well. Like stupidly well in terms of the number of people who downloaded it and played it as well. Actually, were very high. To the extent that it became, I think that was the point where it became an indie game of this year. It's interesting how many best of 2013 lists this game from 2012 was on. And I think
it's funny how that works out sometimes.
Indeed, right. And that comes, I think that really does come from the PlayStation Plus, because it just put the game into so many people's hands that it became culturally relevant in a way that no weird little game on PC would do, in terms of just how many people played it that week. It just hit a critical mass. So there's that. And that obviously has a massive kind of knock-on effect to everything else. So that was also my best week on PC, because people with Vitas or PS3s were telling their mates about this weird little rectangle game, and to people who didn't have the account or didn't have the console or whatever, and they were going on Steam and buying it, and I did very well from that as well. Yeah, I can't talk about the contracts behind those schemes, but basically, it's a thing that's negotiated. Sony says they want it, you tell them what you want in return, and it happens. So it definitely treats people fairly insofar as it's not forced on anyone, and it's a negotiation point that you get what you want in return for it. So I thought it was fantastic. It put Thomas as a big part of what people see on the Sony platforms, and it made Thomas a big part of the story of indie coming to Sony, which is brilliant because it means the game's continuing to sell well on those platforms and well on PC, and it means that when I bring out volume, I have hundreds of thousands of people who know who the hell I am. And you can't really put a price on that because that's useful going forward, kind of on those platforms, and also it all feeds back onto PC. So the short version, yes, I think it's a really good move, but it's something obviously that you have to do for the right reasons, and it worked very well for me.
Cool. All right. Well, if folks want to, the stream is a little behind when people are watching it, but if folks have any questions they want to throw at us, throw at Mike, feel free to do that in the chat as we begin to wind down the show. But is volume going to be? I don't know off the top of my head. Is that PC only for start, and then you're going to work on stuff later, or are you kind of?
It's actually console first.
Oh, okay. Why flip it?
This just because it's me and I like to mess around with it. See what happens.
Clearly a well thought out process.
Yeah, no. Oh no, this is how I make every major business decision. No, so it's launching PS4 and Vita, and then a month later coming to PC, Mac, and SteamOS, and then other platforms unannounced.
As yet determined.
As yet determined, to be determined. Yeah. So it's it's mainly two reasons. One is Sony have been awesome with Thomas Was Alone, so they get a bit of love from me. But actually mainly because I don't want to release a game on 5 platforms simultaneously from my living room. Kind of 2 platforms, then 3 platforms just feels like a better way of spreading it out. And I just think it would be, it feels like a game that makes sense to come out first on a console just because that genre is, I'd say stealth is probably more historically a console genre than a PC genre. But yeah, so far everyone's kind of understood, and I've not had quite the degrees of nerd rage I was worried about with it. But we'll see how that goes.
Maybe contracts would preclude this as well, but I'm curious how your experience thus far has been developing for the PS4 and compared to putting Thomas on the PS3 and that stuff.
Well, what's interesting this time around is with Thomas, we actually had to rebuild the whole game. In fact, like a game that I'd made kind of in my evenings and weekends, the PS3 and Vita version was actually made by like a team of like 4 or 5 devs in a proper studio making it, because that game had to be rebuilt because it was made in Unity, which wasn't supported by those platforms.
Right.
We actually had to rebuild the entire game from scratch, and the guys who did it did a really good job, and the fact that no one realizes it's a completely different game is testament to how good a port it is. But with this one, it's being done in Unity kind of across the board because PS4 and Vita are going to support those platforms. I don't know if I think that's out there. Fingers crossed. And yeah, so that means, so really what that means is it makes it much more like developing a PC game because I'm making volume, and at the end of the process, I'll make each version kind of play to the strengths of its platform. But so far so good.
One of the questions that's kind of come up throughout the course of this, and some folks are asking now, is you specifically mentioned when Total Biscuit, who obviously is one of the most popular guys on YouTube, and obviously drives a lot of traffic and sales to the developers of the games he highlights and says nice things about, assumingly.
I know people who've had games that he said nasty stuff about, and they've also done well.
Well, yeah. I guess some attention is
just visibility. I guess
exactly. I'm curious, and please be honest, even though you're talking to 2 guys who in more the traditional games media, but like I'm curious what has been your experience in those two worlds. Like, obviously you have those worlds are getting closer. I think the gap between the work that folks like Total Biscuit and Northern Line and other folks on YouTube and what we do is getting closer every single day. But there is a difference there right now, and they are kind of different worlds and different audiences. And I'm curious what your experience has been, working between the two, because obviously a lot of what's taught to what developers should do to get attention is through us, the traditional games media. But it seems like actually what's happening on YouTube is, at least in terms of driving attention and sales, might be a little bit more where it's at.
So yeah, print media is dead. No, I'm just no.
Well, no, you're not wrong.
Yeah. I mean, you guys kind of occupy a middle ground anyway, which is interesting. I think, at least, like, I know Giant Bomb for video content more than the written stuff. So what's interesting to me is that the people doing it are very similar. So you've got, and I mean that kind of across the board. So like the guys with like 20 YouTube subscribers making videos are very similar in kind of their attitudes and their perspective, I think, to a lot of the guys and girls running like smaller blogs and smaller websites. And then the guys and girls doing the big YouTube channels are also kind of similar to the big known games journalists in terms of like their personality and their interests and kind of talking to them. They just strike me as, I think it's a job that pulls in similar kinds of people with similar degrees of interest. What's interesting about them is the audience. I've compared it before to the difference between, and this won't work because you're Americans, but okay, so over here we have like a popular film show. I guess it's kind of like our version of Siskel and Ebert.
Okay.
We have like like on TV every week. It's called Film 2014. These are the films that are cool, the blockbusters, Interview with Bruce Willis, that kind of stuff. And that is driving more people to go and see a movie on a Friday night than any of the movie press or movie specialist websites or movie whatever, because just loads of people are watching it. However, the reason a film is on Film 2014 is probably because there's been a year of chatter about that movie on the websites, on the specialist press, on that stuff. And I think it's the same with games. I think in terms of right now, if I want to sell a couple of hundred copies of Thomas Was Alone today, I would be better off getting a mid-level YouTuber to make a video about the game than I would be getting the front page of any video games website. That's the reality, unfortunately, now, is just that's what drives physical, like literal sales of the game. Not physical sales, we're in the future. But like that's what drives the sales. However, in order for those YouTubers to hear about a game, I think there is still a massive importance to the specialist stuff, because the specialist stuff caters to the people who make the YouTube stuff and also caters to the audience who care. The people watching YouTube videos, they're watching them because of the personalities. They're watching them because they think PewDiePie is funny, or they think Total Biscuit's fun, or they think Nerd Cubed is the best comic genius to come out of Britain for some time, which is my theory. These people, they're watching for those people. The games are a backdrop or a product placement at best, closer to a product placement given kind of recent news stories about them. But that's there and that's part of it, but that's not why the fans are there. Whereas I imagine people go to games websites more because of the games than because of the journalists. So it's interesting. I think basically there's this hardcore audience of gamers who are massively important and define what is interesting culturally and what is good. Those are people that you get to via traditional games press. And then there's millions of kids who like watching a funny person on YouTube who may well pick up your game, and maybe that's going to be the first time they play a stealth game ever, but they found out about it through there. So I think both are valid. Both serve very different audiences, though.
So you're saying I should quit my job?
I'm saying you should quit your job. Yeah, it's done now.
All right, I got it. That's Alex. You got anything else you wanted to chime in with before we start wrapping this up?
No, I think that gives. The one thing you didn't talk too much about as far as volume goes, that I saw very much shown in the videos was the user-generated element. It seemed like there's a fair amount of like level building and stuff in there. Did you want to talk about that at all before we jump out of here?
Yeah, I mean, it's not Minecraft. It's not.
Right.
It's not like a big. It's not Little Big Planet. It's not a massive kind of freeform thing. But it's the most requested feature on Thomas Was Alone was people wanting to make their own levels. And because of the haphazard way that Thomas Was Alone was coded, it was not something I could ever kind of put back into the game. So it's something I wanted to do here, and it's something that has factored into the way the game tells its story. Is that you could, in theory, grab my game, buy my game when it comes out, download a bunch of user-generated content, and never play a level that I made, but still get the story, still get delivered the narration and the character stuff. It wraps the story around whatever levels you're playing, in theory. So it's kind of trying to bring user-generated content stuff into more single-player, because I love user-generated content, but as a player I tend to focus mainly on single-player stuff, which means I don't get to see much of it. I'm not seeing all the awesome stuff that's done in Team Fortress, because I'm not playing multiplayer games kind of for a long time. Whereas the idea of a kind of as I'm making a stealth game where every time you load it up once a week or whatever, there's a bunch of new levels for you to try out, and players telling their own stories in those levels, doing their own challenges. That's interesting, and it's something that increasingly I'm seeing as something that's, I think, is going to have an effect on the success of the game financially. Interestingly, because you're seeing a lot of games now. It goes back into this long tail thing. Is if a YouTuber can make a video about the new levels in your game every week, then that's going to do better for the long term of the game. So really, at the moment, for the version that will launch, it's a very kind of light, straightforward tool set. It's basically what I use to make the levels for the game, and I'll keep an eye on it. And if it's something that people get into, if it feels like there's a community forming, I'll kind of start to serve that audience a bit better. Or a lot of times, user-generated content isn't something that catches on, and it might be that it's something that doesn't appeal to the audience. It's not something that's been done many times for stealth players, so I'm not sure. It strikes me as something I always wanted to when I was playing, a game that this game gets compared to a lot is Metal Gear Solid VR missions. I know when I was playing VR missions as a kid, I wanted to make my own environments, but I'm a game designer, so I don't know if that's if that was specific to me. But it's something I'm kind of experimenting. I'm seeing whether people go for it.
Cool. It sounds really awesome.
Yeah, perfect. All right, well, Mike, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thanks for coming by, and we'll have to have you on again as you continue forward into Volumes development. Which can you tell us at all about the release date? Are you looking for this year?
I've said 2014.
You said it out loud,
and that is that's very much the aim.
Cool. And we all know once you say it out loud, you can't ever change it.
Yeah, no, that's how the internet works.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
So for folks that want to continue following you, why don't you pimp your stuff? Let folks know where they can follow you on Twitter, websites, all that stuff.
Okay, honestly, Twitter's probably the best way to find me, which is a sad state of affairs. I'm on Twitter. It's at Mike Bithell, which is Bithell, and which is where I talk nonsense and bollocks all day. And then, you can buy Thomas Was Alone if you want to help out with my rent. That's on Steam or PlayStations of various kinds. But yeah, that's it really. And yeah, fingers crossed. Hopefully, volume soon enough.
All right. Well, Alex, what are you up to this week?
Working on a review, which I can't, talk about yet, obviously, because of embargoes, what have you. But I'll have one of those, and then I will have an encyclopedia bombasket this week for randomly Super Mario Brothers 2. I was after playing 3D World a bunch, I wanted to get back and play some more of that game because the whole 4-character thing, and I've suddenly remembered why that is actually one of my favorite Super Mario games. So I'm gonna do something for it.
Awesome. I'm wrapping up. Hopefully wrapping up a big story about EVE Online today to run tomorrow.
Cool.
And then I think at some point, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to wait till the end of the day to beat that stupid boss in Banner Saga. So
just jump in there, man. Just jump in there.
I think I need to just to cleanse my soul and move on. But Mike, thanks again. We'll have you on again sometime soon, and good luck with the rest of the development of Volume.
Thank you so much. It's been awesome.
All right, Alex, I will talk to you on Friday.
Ooh.